Welcome everyone to today's show. Get ready to be blown away as we dive into the fascinating world of negotiation. Join us on this exhilarating journey as we engage in a captivating conversation with the one and only Professor Dan Shapiro, a leader in the field, and the dynamic Keld Jensen, author of Negotiation Essentials. Prepare to be entertained, inspired, and educated in this electrifying talk that will leave you wanting more. Welcome to Professor Dan Shapiro and Keld Jensen.
Well, good morning, good day, good afternoon, everybody, wherever you might be. My name is Keld, and thank you so much for attending here today. And even more importantly, thank you so much, Dan, for joining me here today. I really love you here, and I know you are extremely busy. Let me do a very brief introduction. I have just launched my new book, Negotiation Essentials. This is actually the first copy I received that is just out right now and available. And I have, together with my publisher, McGraw-Hill, come up with the idea that we wanted to invite a few important people in the world of negotiation to discuss the book. And one of the people that came up first on the list is Professor Dan Shapiro. There's a saying that you should never meet your heroes, but I've met Dan several times, and I can tell you that that doesn't always go, because Dan is as amazing in life and reality as he is when you read his books and what have you. So I'm so appreciative, Dan, that you took out the time. Let me do a very brief introduction for those of you who don't know Dan. I'm sure that's not a lot of you. Dan has published a number of books. I love all of them. A couple of them I would recommend is Beyond Reason and Negotiating the Nonnegotiable. Very important books for the world of negotiation. Besides that, Dan is one of the top 15 professors at Harvard University. He's the founder and director of the Harvard International Negotiation Program, an associate professor in psychology at Harvard Medical School. He advises and helps Fortune 500 organizations and governments globally on everything from crisis to head of states clashing heads. So I think there's a huge need for Dan's expertise around the world right now. And he has published extensively in the field of conflict resolution and negotiation. And perhaps even more importantly, Dan, you are the father of 3 boys. So there's a lot of negotiation going on at home, I'm sure, because I have boys myself. Dan, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it, my friend.
Thank you so much, Keld. It is an honor and a pleasure.
Dan, we have agreed on the headline of today is really what constitutes an effective negotiation. And that is a huge topic, really, isn't it? And we could basically be sitting here talking about that topic for days. But we've kind of picked in my new book and kind of addressed some of the issues that we're going to talk about. And one question that we could ask each other, and basically the audience as well, because you are very welcome to ask questions. Now, we do have limited time today, but we will try to ask questions. So if you just list the questions either on LinkedIn, where we are going live, and YouTube as well, it will appear, and my assistant will publish those that is popping up. By the way, guys, you will participate in a competition about a signed copy of Negotiation Essentials just by joining. And if you ask questions as well, that will just increase your chances of winning a copy. But anyway, Dan, one of the first questions that is a good question, I guess, is what constitutes a good negotiation? And if I should give my 2 cents on that and do it very briefly, I would say a good negotiations in the commercial world is when both parties, regardless whether it's a commodity deal or long-term deal, actually walks away and feel that I did an okay job. I often recommend, Dan, and I would love your take on that, I often recommend my students and clients to open up a negotiation by saying, Dan, I'm here to help you reduce your costs, your risk, and your liabilities, and help you improve your profits. That's really my purpose of being here today. And I would love you to do the same for me. So in my world, then I know I'm kind of just doing a short version here. In my world, a good negotiation obviously is when both parties feel they're walking away being satisfied. Would you agree or disagree with that, Dan?
I think that's great. Yes. First of all, I have to say thank you again for this opportunity to connect with you, and congratulations on your new book, which is amazing. It really is great to be here and to think about it. What constitutes a good negotiation? I agree with you completely. Are parties satisfied, and are they as satisfied as they can be? Is the deal that they walk away with better than anything they can get away from the negotiation table? I'd also add, do they feel good about the deal? Do they feel good about themselves? Because I can put together craft a very good deal. But at the end of the day, do I feel good about that deal? Can I go home with pride and say to my 3 boys, hey, negotiated a good deal today, or I got the deal, but I can't live with myself.
Right. Yes. I think still, Dan, in the world of commercial negotiations, I think there's a little bit too much of an understanding. I don't know whether it's people watching too many Hollywood movies, but there's still too much a risk that a lot of people are getting too competitive, and they just want to win and get that feeling of a win short term, and sometimes they don't really care about the counterpart is winning or losing. Is that something you experience as well still?
Oh, absolutely. So it goes back to how people conceive, you're right, of negotiation. Is it a short-term win at the cost of the other, or is it thinking about my short and long-term interests and building sustainable relationships? Then I'd be curious to hear more about your thoughts on relationship. I know you talk about it a lot in your new book, as well as some of your other work as well, relationships and trust. How have you conceived of these? How do you help your clients build that sense of relationship and trust?
That's a great question, Dan. And trust is a difficult topic and a difficult thing to deal with, because obviously we all know it's not like stepping into a room, I shake your hand and then I say, Dan, could we have trust, openness, and transparency? And you go, okay, Keld, and then we got it. That's not the way it works. It might be easy to talk about, but hard to implement. My take on trust, and it's one of my cornerstone in my work and research and study, is that a lot of people find it like a fluffy soft thing, but I actually find it like a hardcore, tangible thing that you can put a value on. It's actually something that carries a value. We've done studies for many years now that clearly identify that if you have a high level of trust, your transactional cost goes down and your profit goes up. And we've done a number of studies where we can clearly see that a buyer is willing to pay more for a similar service or product from a supplier they like and trust, compared to a similar service or product from a supplier they don't like and don't trust. So we should really be aware of trust. And I think one of the scary things in the world right now, Dan, is that we see that trust has been declining. It's been declining for a number of years. And that is hurting all of us, because, as I said, the transaction cost in commercial negotiations are simply going up. So anyway, it's a long answer to your question here, Dan. But what I really encourage my clients and students to do is actually verbalize trust. I know it sounds like a taboo topic for some people, but actually in the agenda, in the opening of the negotiation, talk about trust. What happens if trust is declining? How can we reestablish trust? How can I make sure that I can be more trustworthy towards you? And I have to say then, and I'm very interested in your take on this, I think there's some of our colleagues out there, and I respect a lot of people in this industry, but I think there's some of our colleagues that are too busy trying to share tools on how to create smoke and mirrors, if you understand what I mean. How to outmaneuver the counterpart, how to read the counterpart, how to, be very strategic about your approach. And sometimes I'm thinking, but hang on a second, isn't it just human beings sitting down talking to each other? Isn't just Dan and Keld today sitting here and talking? So why not just be human? And why not just get it down to a low level and just trust each other and like each other? I don't want to try and sound naive, but that's sometimes my take on negotiation. Am I being naive, Dan?
I think the problem is that people hear that as naive, but it's not naive. I mean, looking at the data in the field of negotiation, looking at the world of practice, these are the essential elements, or some of the most essential elements, to use your word essential from your book, of effective negotiation. I was thinking more recently, I've been working a small bit in the United States with some of the leaders within the judicial system, which has suffered from a lack of trust from the public to some degree. How do you build trust? And one day it occurred to me, trust in a way is an outcome, and it's an outcome of a good relationship. Keld, you and I have known each other for many years now. I trust you. The trust is based upon the nature of our relationship that we've built over time. If I were going to do a deal with you on some issue, I would, I'm sure, share more information with you than with a stranger who I don't know very well. The relationship, is it good? Is it bad? Has an impact on trust. And like you said, trust then has an impact on the value that is produced within a negotiation.
Yes. And so why is it that still we see a lot of organizations and individuals and heads of states that perhaps not put trust very high on the list of things they have to focus on when they're stepping in and conducting any negotiation?
What do you think? I'm curious. Let me get my thoughts together too. What do you think?
Well, I think that some people, as I said earlier, perceive it as a little bit of a fluffy thing. It's not something you can put your hands on. And I think, unfortunately, I think it's improving as well. Let me just start off being optimistic and positive. But I think there might be still an old school tradition out there that negotiation is a macho game. You know, you have to show off, you have to be strong, you have to be sure that you're winning. And trust is not a tool in that toolbox.
I think that's absolutely correct, 100%. Like it seems like there are two different approaches to negotiation. One is the hard positional approach to negotiation. The other is seeing negotiation as a joint problem-solving pursuit. In the former, it's war. And in war, I cannot trust the enemy. They cannot trust me. This is battle. The more information I share with them, the more vulnerable I make myself. But negotiation isn't war. I mean, typically, even wars are negotiated. Ultimately, negotiation is more effectively done. You extract more value if the parties are side by side, problem solving, working together. And for us to problem solve our differences most effectively, we need to be able to build that trust. We need to be able to share information to allow the other to feel comfortable sharing information with us. I agree with you. There are two different models of negotiation, and the model that tends to produce more value requires trust.
Yes.
You gain more.
Yeah. One thing that I try to focus on besides trust is generating value. I am mostly involved in commercial negotiations, and I tend to say that the purpose that two organizations are negotiating is to generate value and then find a way to distribute that value. So one of the things I am trying to resolve or explain in the book is how you can actually make 2 + 2 equal more than 4. How can you actually generate value? Now, where I'm coming from, Dan, and again, with your enormous expertise, I would love your ideas about that as well. But when we talk about commercial negotiation, I feel that value is coming from generating the asymmetric value, what I call negoeconomics, negotiation economics, the difference between your cost and my value, or my cost and your value. So for instance, if your cost of delivery is lower than my value, obviously you should take on the cost and I should compensate you for your cost. And if the opposite were the case, obviously I should be in charge of that, taking on that cost, and then I would be compensated by you. So quite often, just to simplify, in my world, commercial negotiation is sometimes a mathematical exercise where you are not the problem, I'm not the problem. The problem is actually a third individual that is not even here. So you and I have a challenge of solving that mutual problem that we have in between us. And well, Dan, I would love your take on what I just said.
I agree completely. How can so many negotiations produce inferior outcomes because people do not think creatively about how to generate options that maximally service the interests of each of the involved parties.
Right.
And I mean, simply put, how does one, and I love the way you go about breaking down the process of negotiation in your book into steps. I think one step is helping the parties to understand, what do you care about? What are your interests? What are the other side's interests? What do they care about? How can you ask good questions to learn more about their perspective?
Right.
But once we get to the interest, it's sort of like, so what? And this is where I think your point then comes in. The reason I care about understanding what my interests and yours is so we can create some options that work for each of us, creative options. One of the tools I found most helpful there has been a simple principle to separate the process of inventing ideas from the process of evaluating and deciding between them. So often in the commercial realm, I see people coming to the negotiation table. One person says one idea, another says that's a terrible idea. The other offers one more idea. They say that's an even worse idea, and there's no more brainstorming. The value has been lost based upon the process.
Right. Rather
than simply saying, look, let's spend the next 20 minutes Let's just brainstorm some possible options for meeting our interests. Let's not evaluate anything. And suddenly it's popcorn and more good ideas start emerging, and you gain that value that you talk about so wonderfully in your book.
Dan, one of the things that I know you and I agree on is that, human beings in general are not great at listening unless we are very focused on listening. We have a tendency to listen just to prepare to say something ourselves. And I heard one of your keynotes once where you talked about the tribal effect. We all tribes. And I really loved that take on it because it so resonated with what I experienced myself, that, we're sitting here in our own tribe and you are in your tribe, and I don't understand what you're saying. I'm not even listening to you. And one of the things that I find, it's so basic and so simple, is that we don't really listen. We don't really listen to what the counterpart is saying. We're not really listening in between the words either. And I'm often saying to my audience, replace the word that you hear with the sound of a cash register. Because when a negotiator raises a topic, it's because he or she has an interest. So you have to ask questions. Could you just elaborate just a tiny bit about your tribe philosophy, Dan, that I really like?
Sure. So I think that people, when we feel threatened in a negotiation, we often move backwards. We don't lean in, we lean out. And we lean out in a self-protective way. It's a mindset. I've called it a tribal mindset, or more recently, a divisive mindset, simply put. And it has three basic characteristics. If I, Keld, were to say something that offended you personally, or you say something that offends me, boom, we quickly get into that mindset. It's three things. One, it's adversarial. So as much as we might be friends, now I don't like you, Keld. The husband and wife can have this problem too. So one, it's adversarial. Two, it's self-righteous. I know I am right and correct. Legitimacy is on my side and you are wrong and foolish. And third, it's insular. It's closed. I will argue and defend my perspective to no ends, but I'm going to close my ears to your perspective. It's a protective mode. It does protect one, but in terms of everything you've just been talking about, value, creating value in the negotiation, it destroys value. Because I'm in my bubble, you're in yours.
Dan, do you think has that gotten worse? I mean, some people claim that social media has made us more egocentric and less open to other people's ideas. So we are more disagreeing instead of just accepting and showing empathy and kind of respecting your approach and idea might be different than mine. So has it gone worse, or is it the same now as it's always been?
I think it's a huge problem. Has it gotten worse? Perhaps as social media has expanded, into all aspects of our lives. To me, so much dealing with conflict, even negotiating online, tends to be like when instant messaging, for example, or using WhatsApp. It seems to me it's much more about exclamations and proclamations than listening, trying to understand, trying to build that human connection that ferments effective negotiation, value creating negotiation. I think it's a huge challenge. It's here, people are using it. I'm not sure how we can utilize it most effectively. I know you've given a lot of thought to that, even AI and negotiation. I truly would be curious, how have you been thinking about the utilization or non-utilization of social media in negotiation?
Well, in all fairness, it sounds weird I'm saying that. I'm not a big fan of social media, but I'm a big fan of AI. Okay, and some people might get puzzled when I say that, but we've done intensive studies on implementing AI in negotiations. And, I find people out there in the world of negotiations that are scared of AI because they think we're going to be replaced and it's going to be technology 5 years from now that are sitting there negotiating on my behalf. And I'm just saying, well, if AI is actually going to conduct better negotiations than you and I, well, then it's a good thing.
Why not?
I keep saying I don't believe that AI is going to replace negotiators anytime soon, but I believe negotiators that are utilizing AI will replace negotiators who are not using AI very soon. And the reason I'm saying that, and we could spend an hour on just this topic right now, but we have found through studies, I did a huge study together with World Commerce and Contracting and their members, 80,000 of them globally. And we found very clearly then, this is interesting, that we were running exercises where we have teams utilizing ChatGPTs negotiating versus other teams utilizing ChatGPTs. And we compared that to control groups where none of them were using ChatGPT, only one side were using ChatGPT. Yeah. And the conclusion very quickly that I talk about in the book as well is that the teams that were using ChatGPT negotiating versus other teams using ChatGPT were superior in utilizing value, being done within the time frame. And what is even more interesting, and don't ask me why, Dan, because I can't really explain it, but the transparency, openness, and ability to listen and conquer value was just way higher than those who are not using ChatGPT. So let me ask you why. Why do you think people become more honest and transparent when they're using AI compared to not using AI?
I mean, I don't know if I haven't studied this very carefully, and I'm new to all of it, but I wonder whether it's around anxiety, negotiation anxiety. The more I prepare for a negotiation, the more confident I feel. The more confident I feel, the more I can listen to the other. I'm not in a threat mode. I'm in a let's get something done mode. Let's extract value. So I wonder whether it just brings an additional layer of confidence and depth of understanding of possibility within the negotiation.
Could be. I think that's an excellent answer. I haven't even thought about that. And thank you for sharing that one. The only other thought I had about it is that, the AI systems are programmed with a bias. And where I'm coming from, I'm happy about the bias. I'm not necessarily sure it's a good thing that a system had a bias, but they are more collaborative in general. So if you go to ChatGPT or Google Bard or whatever, and try to be aggressive, combative, zero-sum orientated, the system will kind of fight you back saying, should we try an alternative route? Instead of saying that kind of aggressive approach to having that aggressive approach to the counterpart, why not instead? So there's no doubt in my world that, a lot of the system has a built-in bias where they want to be more collaborative, which I think is actually interesting.
That's great. That's so interesting. Yes.
Then another thing, I know we don't have much time left, but another thing I think would interest a lot of our viewers today is what do we do when we lose control in negotiation? It's actually one thing that I've spent time on in the book, because I think we all try that, right? We've all been sitting in a negotiation feeling, God, I'm way behind on points right now. I don't know what's going on. The counterpart is leading the agenda and the direction and asking all the questions. And that could happen for a number of reasons, obviously. And I have to say, by the way, it doesn't have to be a necessarily negative approach from the counterpart. It could just be they're very enthusiastic and got lots of energy. So they're just taking charge. So based on a lot of feedback from people I've been working with throughout the years, I was thinking about, I think we need some advice on how do we regain control in a negotiation if the counterpart is really taking the lead. So I wrote about it in the book, and some of the things that I was sharing is very basic things, like, for instance, taking a break, timeout. When you're behind on points, just like if you're watching a basketball game, ask for a timeout. Just go outside, not necessarily for an hour, or it could be 5 minutes. Just taking that break, going outside, talking to yourself or your teammates, and just figuring out how can we regroup, how can we ask a question, how can we deal with this unfortunate negotiation that we are in the middle of. What have you want to add, Dan? How should we deal with losing control in negotiations?
First, I really like that part of your book as well on different ways of gaining. Are there 6 ways? Am I right that I recall? Yeah. So anybody listening, read those 6 ways. It's useful. Well, one, to the timeout, I think a timeout can be wonderful. I think a timeout can be dangerous. If just a simple example, my wife, I'm in my home right now. If my wife and I get into a conflict and we recognize that the emotions are rising, one of us might say, okay, let's take a timeout. And so I come into my office, she goes into hers. And what happens next if I call my mother and say, Mom, I'm in a fight with my wife, and my mom says, oh my gosh, Dan, how do you live with that person? So all of a sudden, 10 minutes later after the timeout, I come back to my conversation with my wife. I'm twice as amped up. To me, the question is, what do you do during a break? And my notion of what is much more effective to do during a break or a timeout is to assess, where am I at emotionally? Strategically, where do I want to go? Where is the other at emotionally? Strategically, where might they want things to go? And how do we move the process forward most effectively? Self and other.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think, oh, and another big piece to gaining control or keeping control, I think, is being so very clear on purpose. What is
Right.
my purpose in this interaction?
Right.
And I almost invariably go in commercial consultation as well as political or governmental conversations, I'm coming back to that question again and again. If you're going to meet person X today in that meeting, what is your purpose? Well, my purpose is to get a good deal. Okay, what exactly does that mean? What's the kind of relationship you want to build in order to get that good deal? What's your purpose? And to help people hone in on precisely what their purpose is, because that becomes your anchor in the negotiation. If you say something that offends me, that rocks my world, I'll take a deep breath, and then I'm quickly going to ask myself, well, Dan, what's your purpose? Does the relationship with Keld matter at this point in time? Is it the deal that matters? Do you need to pay, for the electricity bills and you just need the sale to happen? What's your purpose? And once I know that, I gain self-control, and I can help move the process forward where I want.
Right. So I think the takeaway here, Dan, is when you have a conflict with your spouse, don't call your mom. That's what I got out of
it. Yes. Depending upon the mom, maybe you should, but yeah.
Now, the weird part, Dan, if I call my mom, she would take my spouse's side and say, pull yourself together, man.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's great. I mean, that's the mom we all want, or should want, in a sense, because that's the mom who's going to keep the relationship together. Absolutely.
Yeah. The last thing I want to talk about for a second is something that is ancient in the world of negotiation. That's preparation. And I know you've been talking about it a trillion times, and so have I. But it's never a topic that dies, I think, because too many negotiators out there, let's just be honest, they are not well prepared. And it's not really because they don't want to or they don't have the brain to do it. It's often because they actually don't know what to prepare. Now, I've been talking to a couple of your colleagues as well, and I've even been disagreeing with a couple of your colleagues. But one thing I believe in is checklist. And I'm even sharing a couple of checklists in the book that I hope is useful for the readers. And the reason that I'm a big fan of checklists, and you can always talk about is my checklist, could they be expanded? Of course they could. You can continue adding stuff to it. But anyway, I just gave my take on it. And the reason, and I often use this example, is that when you board a plane and the door to the cockpit, the flight deck is open, you're seeing the pilot sitting out there with a checklist. And why? It's not because it's the first time he's flying that Airbus 350, but it's because that even though he's flown it 2,000 times before, he knows that he might forget something, and that could be catastrophic for that flight. And the same thing goes for negotiators. So Dan, I'm curious, what's your take on checklists in general?
I think checklists are great. No, I do. I mean, if I'm going to go camping, I want a little checklist, and if I forget the the match to start the fire, we're going to go hungry. I would fully support the idea of a checklist, and even more than that, to think very broadly about different elements to prepare for in the negotiation. At a rational level, what's the checklist look like? At an emotional level, what's the checklist look like? One of the biggest problems I found is that people spend days or weeks or months or years preparing on the rational side of negotiation. What do I care about? What do they care about? What are some creative possibilities for joint gains? What's my best alternative to a negotiated agreement? Rational, it's all incredibly important. It's 50% of the preparation, but I think the other 150% is emotional. How can I prepare emotionally in this negotiation as well? And working off of your work, what can I say or do authentically to try to build trust, to build the relationship, and to ensure that on that level as well, I walk in prepared. I walk emotionally prepared, comfortably prepared, confident. Yeah.
Then I know we have to wrap up, but very quickly, have you, and I'm sure you have, so let me rephrase the question. What was the most impactful negotiation in your career you ever had from an emotional point of view? You don't have to share names or the actual negotiation. I'm just curious about what was the framework? What was that negotiation all about? Is there one that just sticks out?
I mean, I started in the field, well, relative to my age now, very early, about 18, 19 years old. it was right at the turn of communism in Eastern and Central Europe. And I was, a longer story why I was interested in that part of the world, but I was building a program on conflict management for youth and working with refugees all across the region as Yugoslavia was imploding. And those experiences are so deep in my heart, and seeing young kids who lost their parents, lost their siblings in a refugee camp all by themselves, 100 kids in a refugee camp, that really, it's not quite a negotiation, but it's probably a lot of failed negotiations.
Right.
You could see the results of that. Said to me, aren't there better ways of human beings dealing with differences? And I think negotiation to me, beyond there's somewhere just, let's peace, love, understanding. Those are concepts, but really at a granular level, what are some hard tools to deal with the hardest issues in our world? Negotiation to me represents that, and as much in the business as in the political domain, both. So it's the spirit of all those kids who I worked with many years ago that really keeps the flame alive inside of me.
Right. And Dan, thank you so much for doing that. I know you're doing a tremendous thing in that area as well. And I think we should all be very grateful for having people like you trying to help out the world. We certainly need it. It's very important. Just to wrap up.
Wait, you can't wrap up yet. I need to plug your new book because I have read it. I love it. I think it is a wonderful book. And for all of you watching, there are a lot of books out there. What to me Negotiation Essentials represents is a book that not only very clearly articulates the foundations of negotiation, but also looks at them within Keld's real life experiences. And this is a big and for me, and this is one of the most interesting parts of your book. It plants these negotiation concepts within the realm of contemporary challenge and opportunity. So I love, for example, how you're talking about AI in the book, because I still am I'm such a novice in that. So it was helpful for me to learn from your perspectives there. So I'm sorry to rudely interrupt you. I hope this is the one moment you can exempt me from punishment on that. Yeah, but congratulations on your book. It's great to be here with you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much, Dan. I hope we'll have opportunities to work together again. I really love it. Dan, thank you a million for being here. As I said, I know you have an extremely busy schedule, so just putting me on your schedule right now, I'm very, very grateful for that. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I can only pay back by telling everybody, if you haven't already got Dan's book, please get them immediately. It is an essential part of your library as well. So thank you so much, Dan. Thank you for everybody who's been listening in. And good luck with your negotiation. And Dan, all the best to you. You're doing great work. Please continue for doing that for the sake of humanity. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.